Welcome to today's presentation on abuse in Arkansas long-term care facilities. My name is Elizabeth, and I will be guiding you through today's content. Today's objectives include defining terms related to assisted living abuse or elder abuse, identifying types of abuse and exploitation, discussing adult protective services, illustrating the abuse reporting system, identifying who is mandated to make an abuse report, and identifying repercussions of not making an abuse report. We will now review the definitions. Abuse is any intentional and unnecessary physical act that inflicts pain on or causes injury to an endangered person or an impaired person, excluding court-ordered medical care or medical care requested by the patient or long-term care facility or a person legally authorized to make medical decisions on behalf of the patient or long-term care facility resident. Any intentional act that a reasonable person would believe subjects an endangered person or an impaired person, regardless of age, ability to comprehend, or disability, to ridicule or psychological injury in a manner likely to provoke fear or alarm, excluding necessary care and treatment provided in accordance with generally recognized professional standards of care. Furthermore, abuse is any intentional threat that a reasonable person would find credible and non-frivolous to inflict pain on or cause injury to an endangered person or an impaired person except in the course of medical treatment or for justifiable cause. Any willful infliction of injury, unreasonable confinement, intimidation, or punishment with resulting physical harm, pain, or mental anguish. Exploitation is illegal or unauthorized use or management of an endangered person's or an impaired person's funds, assets, or property. Use of an adult endangered person's or an impaired person's power of attorney or guardianship for the profit or advantage of one's own self or another. Misappropriation of property of a long-term care facility resident, that is, the deliberate misplacement, exploitation, or wrongful temporary or permanent use of a long-term care facility resident's belongings or money without the long-term care facility resident's consent. Exploitation is also the fraudulent or otherwise illegal, unauthorized, or improper act or process of a person, including a caregiver or fiduciary, that uses the resources of an endangered person, impaired person, or long-term care facility resident for monetary or personal benefit, profit, or gain, or that results in depriving the endangered person, impaired person, or long-term care facility resident of rightful access to or use of benefits, resources, belongings, or assets. Neglect is an act or omission by an endangered person or an impaired person, for example, self-neglect. An act or omission by a caregiver responsible for the care and supervision of an endangered person or an impaired person constituting negligently failing to provide necessary treatment, rehabilitation, care, food, clothing, shelter, supervision, or medical services to an endangered person or an impaired person. Also, negligently failing to report health problems or changes in health problems or changes in the health condition of an endangered person or an impaired person to the appropriate medical personnel. Also, negligently failing to carry out a treatment plan developed or implemented by the facility, and negligently failing to provide goods or services to a long-term care facility resident necessary to avoid physical harm, mental anguish, or mental illness. Sexual assault. Deviant sexual activity, sexual contact, or sexual intercourse with another person who is not the actor's spouse and who is incapable of consent because he or she is mentally defective, mentally incapacitated, or physically helpless. Physical injury. The impairment of physical condition or the infliction of substantial pain. Where the person is an endangered or impaired adult, there shall be a presumption that any physical abuse resulted in the infliction of substantial pain. Serious physical injury. Physical injury that creates a substantial risk of death or that causes protracted disfigurement, protracted impairment of health, or loss or protracted impairment of the function of any bodily member or organ. Imminent danger to health and safety. A situation in which death or severe bodily injury could reasonably be expected to occur without intervention. Protective services are services to protect the endangered adult from himself and others. Now we will discuss protective services investigations. Protective services shall include, but not be limited to, evaluation of the need for services, arrangement for appropriate services, assistance in obtaining financial benefits to which the person is entitled, or securing medical and legal services. In situations where exploitation, prevention of injury, and protection of the person and his property are at issue, protective services shall include seeking the appointment of a guardian or seeking protective custody. What about protective services in relation to long-term care facilities? Investigations are conducted by the Attorney General and the Department of Human Resources. The Department of Human Resources has the jurisdiction to investigate suspicions of abuse, neglect, or exploitation of an endangered or impaired adult. The Office of the Attorney General has concurrent jurisdiction to investigate cases of suspected abuse, neglect, or exploitation of an endangered or impaired adult in a long-term care facility that is certified. Now that we have reviewed definitions and protective services, as well as protective service investigations, who exactly is required to make a report on suspected abuse or exploitation? Mandated reporters. Whenever any physician, surgeon, coroner, dentist, osteopath, resident intern, registered nurse, hospital personnel who are engaged in the administration, examination, care, or treatment of persons, social worker, case manager, caseworker, mental health professional, peace officer, law enforcement officer, facility administrator, employee in a facility, or employee of the Department of Human Services has reasonable cause to suspect that an adult has been subjugated to conditions or circumstances which would reasonably result in abuse, neglect, or exploitation, as defined earlier, he shall immediately report or cause a report to be made. Whenever a person is required to report in his capacity as a member of the staff, an employee in a facility, or an employee of the Department of Human Services, he shall immediately notify the person in charge of the institution, facility, or agency, or his designated agent, who shall then become responsible for making a report or cause a report to be made. Overall, anyone can make a report. We will discuss further in this course how to make a report. Within long-term care facilities, there are specificities when it comes to reporting abuse. The facility must develop and implement written policies and procedures to ensure incidents are prohibited, reported, investigated, and documented as required by regulations and by law, including alleged or suspected abuse or neglect of residents, accidents including accidents resulting in death, unusual deaths or deaths from violence, unusual occurrences, and exploitation of residents or any misappropriation of resident property. Long-term care facilities are prohibited, reported, investigated, and documented as required by these regulations. When is a report required? A report is required to be made whenever a person required to report has observed or has reasonable cause to suspect that an endangered person or an impaired person has been subjected to conditions or circumstances that constitute adult maltreatment or long-term care facility resident maltreatment, and that person shall immediately report or cause a report to be made. When reports are made, there is specific information that must be included. For complaints against long-term care facilities as well as allegations of abuse or neglect of residents, the Department of Human Services website states that as much information as possible should be provided. This includes the name of the resident or residents, the name of the facility and its address, name of the facility administrator, names of persons who witnessed or have knowledge of the incident, including the relationships of these persons to the resident, for example, an employee or spouse, and facts of the incident. Please include the date and time and provide as much detail as possible. Additionally, the Department of Human Services Adult Maltreatment website notes that the following information should be provided when making a call to report abuse, exploitation, neglect, or sexual abuse of an adult. The name, person, and phone number of the person referred, names of the family members or others who know about the situation, the medical condition of the person referred, and a description of how the person is being maltreated. Reports regarding residents of long-term care facilities shall be made to the local law enforcement agency for the jurisdiction in which the long-term care facility is located, the Office of Long-Term Care of the Division of Medical Services, or DMS, of the Department of Human Services at 501-682-8292, and a call can also be made to the Adult Maltreatment Hotline at 1-800-482-8049, as well as the Adult Maltreatment Hotline online reporting system at arkansas.leapsportal.net/leapsintake. A report of a maltreated adult in a long-term care facility can also be made utilizing any of the following: the phone hotline at 1-800-582-4887 or fax 501-682-8540, email address complaints.oltc@arkansas.gov, and letter to the Complaints Unit, Office of Long-Term Care, P.O. Box 8059, Slot S407, Little Rock, Arkansas. There are consequences for mandated reporters failing to make a report. Any person or caregiver required to make a report of suspected abuse, neglect, or exploitation who purposely fails to do so shall be guilty of a Class B misdemeanor and shall be punished as provided by law. Any person or caregiver required to report a case of suspected abuse, neglect, or exploitation who purposely fails to do so shall be civilly liable for damages proximately caused by the failure. As previously stated, one who is a mandated reporter and purposely fails to create a report is punishable by a misdemeanor, but penalties can include a class misdemeanor all the way through a Class A felony. This could lead to jail time and fines as well as civil penalties. Bottom line, anyone can make a report. You do not have to be a mandated reporter or an employee or visitor of a long-term care facility. If you see something suspicious, then say something.